So I'm going to be reading kind of a strange variety, and then I'm going to start with some poems from my first book, which actually came out in 2012 because it was just re-released by the publisher. So they have copies available that are not chewed by dogs and actually have a new cover that's very pretty. But I unfortunately do not have one of those copies yet. So it's fresh off the presses. But I'm going to start with a couple from my first book and then end with more poems from my current collection that came out last fall. So this poem I'm going to start with is called When Calling Home to Tell Your Dad About the Good Job. And something as context, I graduated from undergrad in spring of 2009, which was a terrifying time to graduate from college because of the financial crash. So I spent my first year out of college doing an AmeriCorps program, making $1,000 a month. And it was very exciting to just be like, I have a middle-class job. Yay. So this is When Calling Home to Tell Your Dad About the Good Job. Say no more food stamps, minimum credit card payments, unfilled prescriptions, terror and small failures, lost keys, broken glasses, library fines. Tell him as much safety as the middle class can afford. Don't mistake his silence for apathy. Listen, a family of 5 raised on less than that. Friday and Saturday nights taxing drunk Michigan State students, copy your commission sales, and a decade of car plants closing, food and a roof over your head. This is not the time to say that you raised his son more than he did, babysat and prepared dinner for a family of 5 as an 8-year-old, slept anywhere but his house as a teenager. When he says congratulations, say thank you. When he adds that maybe you'll be a little less liberal now that you've got some money to tax, and isn't it great the Republicans won the House today? Don't say your nonprofit job only exists because of federal grants. He will probably boast to his coworkers the next day, especially your ex-boyfriend's father. Show them a photo of when you had longer hair and a thinner face, and say something about good raising. Tell him you earned it. Worked your ass off as their intern. The earn is always more important than the it. Say you'll come home, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Say paid holidays and enough money for train fare. Say enough, say thank you, then say it again. And next poem I'm going to read, is an abecedarian, which just means it was hard to write. The lines progress in alphabetical order. And this was a poem I wrote from one of my high school best friends, who also in the predicament of the 2008 financial crash ended up graduating with a BA in photography and joining the Army because there were no jobs in Michigan. So a photographer with a BA joins the Army. Because he fell in love with the word unbearable. Because he loathed shooting portraits of wrinkled baby heads. Because of drinking bad wine in his parents' basement, chanting California, 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 a restless prayer. Can I blame him for finding no magic diamonding his dead carbon drone? For years, he's punched everything in his body, called this event a bruised kinetics breaking, freaking himself into a windmill, glory blades for limbs. God, he could spin himself new. I've seen it. When he said Army, I didn't ask why. And there was a silence jumping out of the car window, jettisoned prayers. Nobody said killing, nobody said combat licking his ear at night. Should I mention it's Christmas and the man's my chosen family? If I say this never happened, then does it not happen for the narrator ogling this story? If I say please, if I say it again with quietude, a deep hush that quivers like a body in a bath towel, rioting, no reveling in the cold, ripe morning. If I don't speak, squad designated marksman, the steadiest shot. He's learning to guide bullets into targets a kilometer away. When I said unbearable in the first line, I meant visualizing the boys as targets with no shoes. I meant years of Xanax and night terrors. There is zero order to this poem. Reader, please zoom back to the car and say blood. And I'll just do one more from this older collection. And this is called Instructions for Grieving. So After I graduated undergrad, I had two friends who unfortunately hung themselves. And this is, so content warning, sad stuff. This one is for one, his real name was Josh, but we called him Garth because he looked like Garth from Wayne's World, and he played guitar. Instructions for grieving, for Garth. It's best not to look at things that hang. Mobiles, swings, wrecking balls. Best not to hypothesize how long it took the pendulum of his body to come to stillness. You can't be responsible for everyone's happiness. Repeat this until it sounds a little less like brake pads giving out to these months of slush and ice. Don't try to picture the room, how it must have been gutted of light. Don't ask what beam was strong enough to bear his beer belly, what he climbed to get there. You don't have to solve the way a body refuses to become as simple as ash or even balance your checkbook today. Just try to hold the parts of you scattered. The national deficit crisis won't mind if you order takeout again today. Eat and be whole. Don't let his death thieve a room in your stomach. Don't inspect your body for signs of traitors. Your chapped hands couldn't tie such a knot. Crooked feet could never kick the stool. Say you could never. And now I'm going to transition to my new book. And this one is about fighting the patriarchy and rape culture. So I'll start with the first poem of the book, and this is called parthenogenesis, which is a big word that just means the ability of organisms to procreate without a mate. So especially some reptiles can do this. As far as I'm aware, humans, not so much. But this is called parthenogenesis. When my mother was young, she feared she was such a good Christian girl. God might grow his new son inside her, like we plop seeds into the garden without asking the soil its thoughts on plumping up pumpkins and peas. And who would believe her? Sister of the town's worst poison-headed hooligans, she tried to do enough good to make up for their transgressions, joined a church that forbade dancing and finished her homework, said her prayers, as if a family's fate balanced on a seesaw, and she could keep her brothers from fleeing off through the stratosphere and never returning back to her on earth from ether's heights. In New England aquarium, an anaconda has borne fruit of only her making. No contact with males, her body wanted a child and made one. Wonder of wonders. A child with only her DNA slithers into this world. I haven't conjured any miracles out of myself yet in this lifetime, and I fear I never will be a witch or a martyr, that I won't be good or bad enough to warrant progeny or remembrance. I used to want to turn my pain into wine stains and watercolors, but now I want it not to touch anyone, to keep it from brushing my true love's arm. What if all I want is quiet, a dog at my feet, television remote in hand, half a turkey sandwich with light mayo and some orange cheese? Who will sing for me? Often I hope nobody will. I'd like a good long sleep. Now I'm going to read a poem called Essay on Guns, which is a story about my dad's childhood best friend. One of his sons actually accidentally shot his brother in a gun accident. So it's a story about those boys. Essay on Guns. I don't remember the boy's name, but I remember him swinging through barn rafters with his brother and me and my big brother, who was afraid of heights but watched from the sidelines as we all didn't fall. The boy's dad, my dad's best friend, years before he was my dad, showed me their pig, said they were fattening him up to make bacon. I felt no mercy pang, only disgust at eating such filthy animals. This is not a story about vegetarianism. This is about the boys I didn't see or think about again until the bullet misfired. The rifle they'd found in their neighbor's garage, up to the mischief of teenage boys in farm country. With so much wide open land, what prize was there in spotting a rabbit and disrobing corn? I know that feeling, but not the one of holding my brother's body with a hole in it, not the feeling of taking off my shirt to sop up blood and feral howl for help. Oh God, oh fuck. I don't know if the brother who lived, who first held the gun, not knowing it held death in its chambers, grabbed his brother plus the intent of the gun in his arms. Or if he jumped back, heart ticking rapid as a hummingbird, tried to breathe with his head bobbing between knees, or if he bolted to the house phone, feet pounding prayers into the earth. I don't know if he was a cussing boy, if he cursed God or cursed himself, if he still does. I know his dad drank the car away. When he called, Dad would shake his head in the sadness of men who have been raised not to say, I ache, I tender, I can't see the sky through his death. The grief of a father is a little like a bullet wound. So much pain gushing out the body, it stains the whole world red. Can you blame a man for wanting a little anesthesia? For not wanting to sit still in the carnage, his hands that once thrust two small boys up toward the sun, that once had two sons. Let's see. So I'm going to read a poem called Verity, and this poem comes with a content warning for sexual assault, and it includes the figure of Saint Agatha. So Saint Agatha was famous because basically, there was a Roman prefect who wanted to marry her, and she said, "No, I'm married to Jesus. You can't marry me. I'm busy." And it was a little more complicated than that. And then he proceeded to torture her and had her breast hacked off. And she's often depicted holding a golden or silver platter with her perky breasts on it. So I'm kind of responding to that image. Verity. Saint Agatha holds her breasts, two jiggly vanilla pudding cups, red berry nipples plopped upon a silver platter. What I can't see is the blood, the knife marks. This gory waitressing, her task for not consenting to open for Quinty Annis. Oh, yes, he begged, but she was a shut clam. This is supposed to be a better ending. To be a carved Christmas turkey, but pure in the eyes of God. Once I believed I could save a woman. Called campus police when I heard screaming in the apartment next door. Listened to a lamp crash, a desk thrust over, thuds of a body becoming pocked with night's worst ink. The door unlocked to a stranger in her underwear. Her lips split, meat showing. Her assailant, a college athlete in need of a haircut and a better God. She asked me to stay near her while she pulled her bedclothes over her bones. The cop turned his back dutifully. I held her as he asked scripted questions. Did she know the man? Did he penetrate? Did she say no? Had she been drinking? Had he been drinking? Agatha, this woman was so small. Barely 5 foot, small arms, small legs, small breasts. I thought she was brave to banshee, scream to wake the neighbors. But it didn't stop his rabid, mangy want. Agatha, I want a painting of you with your breasts as mangled cutlets on a cutting board, a man with a white apron drowned in red. I want someone to tell the truth. Okay, so at the risk of getting political, this poem feels a little extra fitting in these months. So this is the poem that sort of started the collection. It's where the title comes from. And it's called 5 Days Before the Election. And I started writing this book in earnest in fall of 2016 when I was, so as a survivor of sexual assault, the election of a man who talked openly about grabbing women by the pussy was kind of triggering for me. And hearing that language repeated over and over, I feel like the word triggering gets overused, but I think it's actually very correct in this circumstance. But just having that language be overused and repeated through the media was something that I had to wrap my head around and made me very depressed and angry. So 5 days before the election, and I don't want to feel the earth today. Because a rich man is in it who says he has the right to grab the most mine thing I can imagine, but maybe wouldn't want to. Because maybe I am almost 30 and have grown stately in myself these last 3 years, watched ass and breasts become rounder worlds, and said, okay, I can inhabit more cells, can be the urn size of my grandmother's. And it is American to consider that he has the right to lead America, to gather the wrinkled hands of bankers and show them all the nooks and crannies, cloaking hushed treasures, teach them how to strip the quiet armor women don when we are tired of eyes following our legs up staircases. I want to lie down in a riverbed, to let the water rush over until I am a cold nothing, touched only in the urgent pity of rescue divers dragging me back to earth. I want to let a man, a stranger, worry over my body, what makes it tick and gasp. I want to name each thigh dimple and raised vein, each flake of dry skin and stubbled hair, lest someone think they were ownerless, run their hand up my skirt on a bust like it wasn't a valued thing thieved. I want to be precise about how rich I am, how bountiful my folds of skin, this museum of a pussy, this grand opera belly. Let the government erect a fence around my yards of legs, lush country of bush and blood. Let me be a closed border, a private club. All right. Read a couple more here. So this poem is called Some Things We Carried, and it's, if you know this short, so it's a longer work, but there's a short story from The Things They Carried that uses this refrain that I'm using here. It's by Tim O'Brien, so this poem's after Tim O'Brien. Some things we carried. We carried 28 days of pills and small plastic dials. We carried the dates of our last periods. We carried lipsticks and pressed powder compacts. Sometimes we carried keys to buildings we didn't live in anymore. Sometimes we carried mace and feared it'd be used against us. We carried smartphones that carried the news, the weather, maps, emergency contacts. Sometimes we carried each other. Sometimes we carried a woman, the wife of a young psychology professor, after she broke down in the cocktail bar over a parade of whiskey sours. Sometimes we carried her black eye. Always we carried her rehearsed story, changing the kitchen light bulb at a late hour, her foot slipped, head slammed against the corner of the counter, how she had to keep repeating it to friends and strangers. We carried how leaving was impossible. We carried how she was his student before she was his wife. We carried the scream of a woman in the college apartment complex, the sound of a lamp crashing against the wall, her ex-boyfriend on the rugby team who'd come back to claim her, the blood on her lips as we held her and waited for paramedics. We carried our mothers who carried us. We carried how they left until their fathers stopped drinking. We carried each other's pregnancy tests and Plan B and Monistat and CVS bags hidden beneath things we didn't actually need, extra toothbrushes, deodorant, and iced tea. We carried the names of children we feared having. We carried tampons and Xanax and books of poems. We carried our youths. We carried the first men to pound fists against walls next to our heads. We carried wanting to be wanted like that, like they'd break us if we weren't theirs. We carried fear each time we left. We carried our luckiness. We carried what we hadn't been charged to endure, our good teeth and bones still in place. We carried bar tabs and a series of credit cards. Sometimes we carried condoms and sometimes we carried risk. We carried each other home and said that was safer than not carrying each other home. Sometimes we carried the gentle tastes of each other's mouths. Sometimes the carrying was so gentle. I think I'll just read 2 more here. Okay, I'll read 1 more here. Sorry, I thought I was doing better on keeping track of things. Tapping therapy. So tapping therapy is an alternative therapy that gets used for pain management. So a while ago, I struggled with chronic migraines and also with chronic hip pain. And that's all you need to know for this poem. And it's funnier, so it'll be less depressing. Tapping therapy. I Googled the word moo-moo, and I'm very sorry my life has come to this desire for shapelessness. I am a blob of pain in the recliner this summer, my hip on fire, pleading for a river of opiates. And it gets worse. It would not be wrong to call today's sack dress a moo-moo. The doctor says to ice my ass 6 times a day until the bursitis calms. And Carol, my sweet psychologist friend, Skypes from Oregon to talk about pain, about bad stories I've stored in my hip too long. She tells me to tap my face and chest and say, I can love myself with the pain, with the stories. And I sob for my uncle's bad hip, his never enough opiates and alcohol, embalmed middle-aged corpse, my own young wildnesses, the overdose, paramedics who dropped my body like heavy groceries down a steep stairwell and gave me a new crooked gait. She says I have wound shame into a ball and stored it in my hip for years. And she is right. And my sobbing is right. But I don't know if the moo-moo is right, if it's a form of acceptance or quitting. My love comes home early from a party and asks what I am doing, why I am crying and touching my face. And I say, I am busy doing a weird thing with Carol. He wouldn't understand her methods, would want something more scientific than this beautiful woman instructing me to tap my face and let the old stories close. Thank you.